analysis. And Dr. Trites, before the break, I was asking you to comment on your response to the whether we should put greater emphasis on stellar sea lions with respect to Table 5.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the question or issue comes down to diet. How much sockeye salmon's in their diet. So I'd like to go to that figure 36 on page 94 of tab 21. So this is the work that Mr. Lisiak has been leading, and it's the DNA results. It was shown earlier in a slightly different format. But to me, what's so intriguing on here is as we go across, you see that of the salmon species that are identified positively, you've got sockeye there just over 5%, the least of all the species, followed there by pink, coho, chum, and chinook.
Isn't sockeye at 15%?
The second bar is sockeye salmon.
Oh, I'm looking at the bar sockeye or pink at the
Yeah, so I'll take you
right.
across to there. But if we just start with the ones that we know for sure what they are, you can see that sockeye is not very frequently occurring compared to the rest. The issue comes down to this one about sockeye or pink, the ones that can't be categorized yet. More analysis, it wouldn't take very long to do, could tell us for sure, are those mostly sockeye or mostly pink? So if you do with a positive ID, you can see sockeye is the least preferred, which is consistent with what you've seen for northern fur seals, consistent with killer whales, for example. But so until we get that one bar resolved, there'll be some disagreement perhaps about how important they are. If we look at off of Washington, where we have the Columbia River, it's interesting that sockeye and pink occur in very low abundance. Now, there's not many pink in the Columbia to begin with, but there are a lot of sockeye. And you would think if sockeye were important to stellar sea lions, we'd be finding sockeye salmon there showing up. But it's a relatively infrequent, the occurring prey species there. So I think that when this analysis is done, we're probably going to find something consistent with the Columbia River, which would be that sockeye are not that important. If you look at overall, the diet is estimated to be about just over 10% is salmon for stellar sea lions. If you break that down, 5% of the 10%, it gets down to a very small percentage.
All right. And thank you. And Mr. Lesiak, do you have any comment?
Yeah, I'm not ready to hang my hat on these particular data yet. As Dr. Trites has pointed out, these samples need to be analyzed to sort out the ambiguities. But I think even more importantly, we need to run the other 2/3 of the samples that have been collected but not genetically analyzed at all. And we need to expand these studies. We've only looked at stellar predation in the southern part of BC, which represents roughly half of the population. We need to extrapolate, extend those studies to the other northern part of the province. But in terms of the importance of sockeye predation, I think it's a matter of what the total consumption is and also what proportion of that total consumption is sockeye. In the case of stellar sea lions, I think we have a very high consumption figure and a low proportion of sockeye, which could still result in a significant amount of sockeye being consumed.
Right. So the question then is, what does this 5% translate to in volume?
Okay, well, the total salmon consumption in our study area was about 17,000 tons, which is 17 million kilograms a year. About just over 14 million of those kilograms occurred in BC. That's sort of half the stellar sea lion population in BC. And even if 5 or 10% of 14 million kilograms is sockeye, that represents a lot of sockeye.
Mr. Lesiak, can you explain what is a depensatory effect?
Generally, predation tends to be compensatory, the opposite of depensatory. And what that means is that these predators, most of them are not specialists, but opportunists that will feed on whatever is locally and seasonally abundant. And so what happens if it's a good year and lots of the salmon eggs hatch and fry are abundant? Predators will take a larger fraction than if in a poor year where there's few fry. And if the predators in the lake and river where these eggs are hatching take lots, there's left for the predators out in the estuary. And so, but if the predators in the lake take less, there's more left for predators in the estuary. So they tend to compensate one another and basically buffer the system. Depensatory mortality is the opposite. And this is where you get these sort of artificial situations where there is the balance between predator and prey is disrupted. And most of the seal problems, the conservation issues we're dealing with are because of this imbalance. Things like Puntledge River Chinook, they've been depressed to very low levels. But in that same system, there are still healthy, large returns of pink salmon and chum salmon that attract lots of predators. And these large numbers of predators congregate in the area and remain in that area between the pink and the chum runs and feed on these low depressed Chinook stocks. And that's where you get a artificially high level of predation. And these predators their numbers aren't dictated by the number of Chinook returning, they're dictated by these larger runs that attract them to that area. And so you get into a situation where prey populations, the more depressed they become, the higher the predation rate. And those are the situations we're dealing with seals. So if this investigation commission were into some of the smaller steelhead and coho runs that are going up the Fraser with these still relatively large sockeye, I would have more concern over the impact of seals.
Right, so depensatory effect is there's a greater predator impact with the same number of predators if there's fewer prey. Is that?
Yeah, and it could be even fewer predators, but it's the ratio of predators to prey.
Right.
So you can have even moderate level predators, but with very low prey abundance, you get a depensatory effect.
Okay, and so I think you've given some examples of depressed prey stocks. What are some examples then of depressed prey stocks impacting on pinniped predation?
Well, I've already mentioned Chinook in the Puntledge River. We've got in the Strait of Georgia, we've got healthy seal populations with depressed rockfish stocks, depressed lingcod stocks. On the East Coast, they've got increasing large gray seal populations. They've got depressed Atlantic cod stocks. And in all of these situations, I don't think anybody thinks the pinnipeds are the factor that drove these prey stocks to low levels, whether it's natural catastrophic events or habitat disease or overfishing. But once these prey populations are reduced, and you have healthy pinniped populations maintained by other prey, that's where you get these large impacts.
If we could turn to page 81 of the report. It says in the middle paragraph there, quote, "It has been postulated that harbor seals in British Columbia might have a net positive effect on the return of adult salmon by consuming species of fish that prey heavily on salmon smolts." And Mr. Lesiak, do you agree with that comment?
No, as I mentioned earlier, I think that pinnipeds do prey on other fish predators, but I'm not aware of any of the species that we've identified in seal diets in British Columbia being heavy salmon predators.
Okay, thank you. If we could then turn to Canada's list of documents, tab 23A. There's a number of there's a number of web-paged documents here that we've included. And so, Mr. Ford, Dr. Ford, sorry, could you please explain what the Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research Initiative is? And in answering that question, could you explain what this document is also?
The Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research Initiative is one of a number of ecosystem research initiatives that were undertaken by DFO in the various different regions of the country. So these initiatives were meant to implement steps towards ecosystem-based management that was mandated by the Oceans Act. And so to help that process get underway, these ecosystem research initiatives were meant to choose kind of a model study ecosystem in each of the regions and then to examine them in great detail. For Pacific region, the Strait of Georgia was selected as the area to focus on.
All right. And this document, where does this document come from?
That particular document's on the DFO website.
All right. And if we could have that marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit, what do we got? 798.
And Mr. Registrar, if we could then turn to the next document at the same tab.
Letter B.
Letter B, yes. And so, actually, if we go to the next tab, D, sorry. So that's A, B, C, D, key outcomes. Yes, so again, Mr. Ford, could you provide for us an overview of what some of the key outcomes were? And perhaps just a bit of the chronology of this, where we're at with this initiative.
Okay, the initiative began in January of 2008. It involved a wide range of studies looking at different components of the Strait of Georgia ecosystem. These are just a few outlined here in key outcomes, a few of the anticipated outcomes when the project started, and included development of tools for ecosystem-based management. Those would be primarily ecosystem models that can be used to better understand and predict how the ecosystem functions. And there were problems initially that warranted being addressed, and those were specifically with Coho and Chinook. This project began in 2008. It's a 3-year project with one additional year of analysis and synthesis that is underway this fiscal year. But at the time that the ERI began, the sockeye situation hadn't developed to the point it did in 2009.
Okay.
And then the third outcome was anticipated to be a better understanding of the role of apex predators like harbor seals in food webs of Georgia Strait.
All right, and is there...
I'm sorry, Mr. Timberg, to interrupt you. Without in any way intending to rush you, I just would note that we're at the 60 minutes of your estimate right now. And if you have a revised estimate, that would be fine.
Yes, thank you. I've cut back significantly. I would like to get through this research initiative because I think it's relevant for the EcoPath modeling and the ecosystem management. That this was basically a pilot, I understand. And then I have a series of questions with respect to whether or not we need to look at the location of mortality in analyzing and understanding predator-prey relations. And then I think I would be completed. So I'm hoping to be finished in the next 10 minutes. Is that... I'll do my best.
I can't disagree with that.
Okay, thank you. And is there a modeling component to this ERI program?
Yes, there is. There's 4 different models that have been examined and developed as part of the ERI. One is an ocean and atmospheric forcing model. Another model looking at low trophic level effects in the ecosystem, and then 2 models that have involved higher trophic level interactions, and one of those is EcoPath with EcoSim type model, and another is one called Osmos that is a slightly different approach, but again looking at connections between upper trophic levels.
And who at DFO is best placed to speak to this modeling component?
Probably Chai Hong Fu, who developed the Osmos model with other co-authors, or Ian Perry.
And who's Ian Perry? Okay. And if we could then move to tab F of the same. This is a list of ongoing research projects. And did you participate yourself in any of this ER-related work?
Yes, I did. I was involved in 2 projects. One is shown here on this page, about fifth down, diet and distribution of porpoise in the Strait of Georgia. I referred to that study earlier, looking at stomach contents to gain insight into the diet of these animals in the Strait of Georgia ecosystem. And another project that looked at the relationship between changes in abundance and habitat use patterns of mammal hunting killer whales coinciding with the increase in harbor seal abundance in Georgia Strait over the last 30 years or so.
All right, and I'm going to move on, but I'm just wondering, for the assistance of the Commissioner, if you could just provide an overview of what was the intent of this ERI project and what you know, what you know about what's going to happen in the future.
Well, I think it was really to get a more complete understanding of how the ecosystem works, temporal variability in the ecosystem, spatial variability, and how energy flows between trophic levels in the food web. Those were some of the key goals. Also to better understand resilience of the ecosystem, how it's vulnerable to perturbations through fisheries or other factors, and how resilient the ecosystem is. And then again, to specifically develop models that can be used as tools down the road to actually better put the Strait of Georgia into an ecosystem management context, and to apply those tools to management of other parts of the ecosystem outside of Georgia Strait.
All right, thank you. And just for clarity, I'm going to suggest that exhibit we just entered would be for all of the tabs, because that, as I understand it, the first page is from the website, and then the documents that follow are the links that if you clicked on it, you would go to that. So I'm wondering if that's permissible.
Barring any objections from participants, we don't have a concern with that approach.
This is Ms. Gardner's suggested that they perhaps be marked subcategory A, B, C, D for clarity. So I'm certainly agreeable to do that. And then we would just need to, Mr. Registrar, just perhaps go through this tab so we can all get our ABCs correct.
So 798. You've already marked 798.
So the first page perhaps would be 798, and then the second page would be 7098A.
You have a number of documents here that are A to F, is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Registrar, what was Exhibit 798 again? I'm sorry.
798 was the Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research Initiative.
Sounds great. And what was 797?
797 was the Species at Risk Act Management Plan Series, Management Plan for Sterile Sea Lions in Canada. Now, if you want these marked 798A through F, I notice you've already got them marked A to F there.
Mm-hmm.
If I mark them 798, starting A,
So it'll go A to,
we'll be missing 798.
okay, so
See, it comes out of sequence.
we'll just knock one off the end.
Yeah, so you'll have 798, 798A. Actually, to do it properly in terms of sequencing the exhibits, 798 will be A,
Yeah,
will be item A, the Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research. That'll be 798.
okay,
798A will be Strait of Georgia Ecosystem, which is shown as B here.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so that'll be A. 798C will be Eco Research Initiative ERI Pacific Region. So that's B. 798C will be the Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research Initiative. 798D will be Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research Initiative Modeling Component. And the Strait of Georgia, and E will be the Strait of Georgia Ecosystem Research Initiative Ongoing Research Projects.
Thank you. So at the bottom of page 13, we have the test or the analysis for what is a significant predation. And for the panel, Dr. Treitz, would you agree that the location of any Fraser River sockeye mortality is also a consideration in assessing possible predator impacts?
Yes, I would agree.
So that would be...
So that's our first criteria on there, that the prey and predator must overlap in time and space.
What? Oh, yeah. So my colleague's saying it's the location of increasing mortality is another consideration that would be helpful?
So I guess what you're getting at is, are you asking, does it matter if the amount of prey consumed is high? Is that what you're touching on? Because the reality is that depending on the species, if their sheer numbers are high, they could eat a low amount, and that could in turn have an effect.
But would you agree that most Fraser River sockeye die as a result of predation? That's
We don't have any evidence of that. They could be dying of a number of different things.
okay. So,
But I think it's fair to assume if they don't get back, they have died.
there we go. All right, and so I can't listen to you right now. And I guess my point is the issue of where the mortality occurs is, does it happen in the Georgia Strait or does it happen in the open ocean? Does it happen in the river is a relevant factor that we should be looking at.
You know, in our assessment, and here I'll go just beyond marine mammals, including also birds and fish, there is evidence that predation occurs throughout the life history of salmon.
Right, and so where that mortality happens is a helpful consideration.
Definitely.
And then whether a particular predator is feeding on a fry or a smolt or a juvenile salmon or an adult salmon is another relevant consideration.
That's correct.
Okay. And so do we know whether, or do you know whether Fraser River sockeye mortality in freshwater has been increasing?
In terms of marine mammals,
Yeah.
there's no evidence that they are. I mean, some are in river mouths, for example, some freshwater areas. But when you look at predation that's been recorded by harper seals on smolts coming out of rivers, there's only 2 spots in British Columbia that's been identified. One is the Puntledge River. The other is in Port Moody. Both are associated with hatcheries. Both are associated with rivers where there's been changes, dredging, bridges, lights from the towns and cities. And so it's not clear whether or not this is a normal predation occurrence, or if it's just an artifact of how the environment has been changed and the mammals have taken advantage of it.
Right.
One thing that is interesting is that none of these 2 cases is there any predation on sockeye.
Okay. And if we could turn to page 83 of your report, the 4th paragraph there, the first sentence, you say that, quote, indications are that the problem...
Just can wait 1 second until I see where you are.
So the 4th paragraph there, indications are that the problem of low survival may be explained by conditions encountered at sea. Okay.
Okay, the point here is that most of what we know about salmon, it would appear, is from the freshwater systems. Once they get into the near-shore coastal waters, slightly less. And it seems that once they get out into the open ocean, we know even less about them. So that's the point of this, is that we essentially don't know, and so therefore it raises a fairly big question because it's part of the life cycle that we don't have good data for.
So when you say encountered at sea, does that include knowledge of the Georgia Strait, or are you combining Georgia Strait and the open ocean?
With this statement here, we're being very general and applying both areas.
All right. And then if we go to page 29, the third paragraph. So here you state that, quote, the mortality of salmonids in the ocean can be substantial, and indications are that the early mortality is substantial, so 2 to 4% for the first 40 days, but also that there is substantial mortality afterwards, 0.4 to 0.8 per day for the next 410 days. And so my question is then, Fraser River sockeye salmon, would you agree they spend their first 40 days primarily in the Strait of Georgia?
All I can do here is just essentially refer to the work of Beamish and Neville and the work that they've cited.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to my knowledge here, we've cited the work as it's been published, and we're drawing estimates that they've made. We've not made these estimates.
Okay. Do you have any knowledge yourself as to where Fraser River sockeye spend, where they're located in their first 40 days in the ocean?
I don't, and when I've asked, trying to understand more about the behavior of sockeye, for example, we puzzled over why do sockeye seem to be the least frequently occurring salmon in the diets of marine mammals. And to answer that, I think we have to find people understand the behavior of salmon. How do they school? What are their anti-predator techniques? And it seems that that's an aspect of the life history that very few people know.
Okay.
And it's one of the big question marks we have.
So, but you'll agree then that of the 6 predators you've selected for further research, only 2 of them occur in the Strait of Georgia. That's the common muir and the river lamprey, that the other 4 don't occur in the Strait of Georgia.
That's correct.
All right. And then how do you reconcile that then with Dr. Beamish's observation that early mortality within the first 40 days is quite significant? I'm curious that you're not focusing on predation in the Strait of Georgia.
Yeah. Well, we have tried to focus on predation throughout the entire system, entire life history. I think you're going to get more into this when Dr. Christensen is here, as he speaks specifically to the fish aspect, predation by other fish. And that's essentially, I think, what this mortality estimate's here. This does not refer to predation by marine mammals,
right,
but is touching on predation by fish, which will be the subject of the next panel, I believe.
So your work then is primarily in the open ocean and not in the Strait of Georgia?
No, my work has been with marine mammals
right,
and predation by marine mammals.
Okay.
And these comments here are, I believe, are attributed to predation by fish,
all right,
as opposed to predation by marine mammals.
Okay, that's
and
very
perhaps
helpful.
that should have been clarified when we stated the estimates.
All right, and my time is up. Thank you very much.
Mr. Commissioner, Tim Leadham for the Conservation Coalition is going to use the next 10 minutes.
For the record, Leadham, initial T, appearing as counsel for the Conservation Coalition. Good afternoon, gentlemen. We're at the end of a rather long day for some of you. And I want to start off with a general question of you, Dr. Treitz, that your report is entitled Predation Upon Salmon. And you've left out of the predation equation, obviously because of your terms of reference, the biggest predator, I would suggest, of sockeye salmon is the human species. Is that correct?
That's correct, and you are also correct that we had our terms of reference, and the effects of fishing was not considered to be predation per se.
But if I can look at this holistically, and maybe even from an ecosystem conceptually, if we put the human factor back into the equation, if we're saying, for example, that we're going to allow or call other predators to make more fish for humans, how is that an ecosystem? How does that balance out in terms of an ecosystem approach?
I can't speak specifically to sockeye salmon in this case, but I know in other ecosystems, for example, the Bering Sea, where I have worked on constructing ecosystem models, that we can show the effects of humans and how removing one species can have cascading effects throughout an entire ecosystem. Humans definitely, are major factors in ecosystems. Removing any one species can have cascading effects and indirect effects that we don't think of beforehand, but often when we follow through the mathematics and the numbers, we can reason out why we get these predictions from the models.
And I suppose from the aspect of my clients, there's been human predation upon sockeye salmon for centuries. And then we get to commercial harvesting of salmon. And my clients approach it from the perspective that when there was human predation upon sockeye, up until the time that commercial harvesting began, there seems to be healthy populations of sockeye. So perhaps there's a right way to catch fish and maybe a wrong way to catch fish.
Yeah, and I think perhaps the other aspect is, sort of pushing your question, I think, is we're just catching sockeye salmon.
Yes.
But of course, fisheries are taking other species as well, cod, pollock, flatfish, and fisheries that are removing other species of fish can also have indirect effects. What happens when the major prey of perhaps a marine mammal is removed? What are they going to switch to compensate for it? And that's why in our recommendations, our final one was the need to essentially model with mathematics the whole flow of the life cycle of the salmon to figure out just those sorts of things and issues you're raising, to see if there's other weak links in here that could explain more than what our simple overview of predation has been.
Right, and that was, looking at your report, that was your last recommendation, number 5, I think, or
That's
the last
right.
paragraph. And I wanted to talk to Dr. Ford and Mr. Lesiak, too, about the recommendations contained in Project 8, and to see if you had any comments, particularly with respect to this modeling that's being proposed here by Dr. Trites and Dr. Christensen.
I don't have any specific comments on that particular section of the report. I think ecosystem modeling can be a very valuable tool. There's various models being developed both within DFO as a result of this ecosystem research initiative I just mentioned, and elsewhere. So I think that it is an important role. There is an important role for predictive models in ecosystem-based management.
Right, so you don't take issue with that particular recommendation, do you?
I'd have to see if there are specifics.
Page 83,
but
please.
In general, I agree with the importance of ecosystem modeling.
We're now looking at Project 8, and just to draw your reference, Dr. Ford, to page 83. It's the last paragraph on that page.
I agree in principle with that recommendation.
Right, and Mr. Olesiak, would you also agree in principle with that recommendation?
I also agree that modeling, ecosystem modeling is a valuable tool, but I would caution that these models are only as good as the data that go into them. And I think that as we've heard today, our understanding of food habits of these predators is insufficient right now to construct models that are actually going to give us predictive capabilities. And
if I can just go back to Project 8, one page to page 80, or a couple of pages to page 80, there's a heading, Ecosystem Manipulation, a Scary Concept. And then I want to actually get Dr. Ford's and Mr. Olesiak's comments on the last paragraph under that heading, which is found on page 81. And the paragraph begins, the first step to moving beyond ad hoc experimentation with ecosystem manipulation is through analyzing the effects at the ecosystem level, be it through conceptual or quantified ecosystem modeling. It must further be recognized that there are limits to current empirical knowledge and modeling capabilities. Thus, experimental protocols need to be carefully developed as part of adaptive management schemes. And there's a reference then to Walters, 1986. That would be Dr. Carl Walters, would it? Dr. Trites?
Yes, it is.
All right. Could I get Dr. Ford's and Mr. Lesiak's reaction to that? Are you in agreement, basically, with that, what's being propounded there?
I have to confess I haven't thought extensively about that that recommendation, but it appears to be reasonable to me.
And Mr. Olesiak, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this question, but I do think that we need to learn from the way we've managed in the past and in the present. And I'm just not sure to what extent the management should be conducted as an experiment.
Right. But
Monitoring might be more of what I would, sort of the philosophy I have.
But you would agree that there has to be a high degree of caution applied if we're going to be dealing with ecosystem manipulation.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I agree.
Now, the other aspect of the report that is absent, well, not totally absent because there's reference to it throughout Dr. Trites, and that is the sockeye themselves are predators. And so I think as you put it in the report, it's the law of the sea, at least from a fish's perspective, is to eat or be eaten. And so I want to throw this question back at you. If you look at what seems to be driving the decline in sockeye, it's either the fish are not getting enough food to eat, or they're being eaten by something that's bigger than them. At least from an ecosystem approach. So can you hypothesize what it is in your knowledge? Is it that they're being eaten or that they're not eating?
No, I don't have a good answer for you on that. Perhaps one of the sort of interesting observations is, and one of how well our marine mammals have been doing in British Columbia, where, for example, sea lions are increasing, whereas you go to Alaska and they're on the endangered species list, compared to how poor our salmon have done, whereas in Alaska they've done extremely well. And so conditions in the ocean have changed. Something major happened in the mid to late 70s. The ecosystem seemed to have flipped, and so it would appear to be much more bigger than just a simple predator-prey relationship. There's something in the physical oceanography that's also influenced the dynamics. That probably ties to food, distribution, water temperatures. It's a much bigger story than just simply a predator-prey relationship.
All right. So you would then, if you were asked to quantify what's causing the decline in the sockeye for the last decade or so, you would say that the predation aspect might be a contributing factor, but it's not certainly not the sole factor.
We could certainly find no smoking gun in the sense of saying yes, predation was the driving factor. We recognize that it is a contributing factor, but it would appear, at least when we sit back and look at the whole North Pacific, what's going on, that there's much bigger forces at play.
Mr. Commissioner, I had 20 minutes allotted to me, and it looks like it's the magic hour. And I'll come back with my last 10 minutes tomorrow morning, if that suits you.
Thank you very much.
Hearing is now adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.